gas is like the untapped opportunity that you have that the industry hasn't really, maximized. After you've drilled, you've explored, you've produced, you have the midstream. The midstream basically just deals with talking about the transportation, you're talking about the processing, the refining aspect of, oil and gas, right? So you're talking about transportation, you're talking about pipeline and the different other modes of transportation, that you have within the oil and gas industry.
For years, Africa's oil has flowed like a quiet river beneath the soil. Dark, powerful, valuable. We have measured it in barrels, counted it in billions, debated it in boardrooms. But oil is more than what is pumped from the ground. It is the rig worker before sunrise, the fabricator welding steel in coastal yards, the refinery that could power industries, the petrochemical plant that could birth a new manufacturing. The real story is not just extraction, it is a connection. From upstream to downstream, from pipeline to port, from gas flare to power plant, there is a chain. And within that chain lies something greater than crude: opportunity. Opportunity to refine instead of export raw, to manufacture instead of import, to train instead of outsource, to build ecosystems, not just oil fields. So today on Just Africa, we look beyond the wellhead. We trace the full value chain, the skills, the systems, the industries waiting to be strengthened. Because Africa's energy future will not be defined by what lies beneath the ground, but by what we choose to build above it. This is the second segment of Just Africa on SOUQ News Television. You can follow us on all our social media platforms at SOUQ News TV. And of course, subscribe to the Just Africa show on our YouTube channel. So in the second segment, Just Africa takes a practical look at where the real opportunities lies across Africa's oil and gas value chain and what it actually takes to unlock them. Our guest, Collins Okamadiri, is a legal manager at BUA Group. He draws from his extensive experience advising across the entire oil and gas value chain, including regulatory, advisory, project finance, M&A, and large-scale transactions. Collins Okamadiri provides a grounded, deal-level perspective on how projects are structured, financed, negotiated, and executed. Hello, Collins. Welcome to Just Africa.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you once more for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yes. Okay, so let's have this conversation. Most of the time when people hear oil and gas, they often think only of one thing, and that's drilling. So can you break down what the full value chain actually looks like?
Thank you for that question. The oil and gas industry, of course, when you hear of oil and gas, has more to do than just the upstream aspect of it, right? Which majorly covers drilling, like you've mentioned. When you talk about oil and gas, as an industry, broadly, you can say, divided into three different streams, right? There's the upstream, right? There's the midstream, and there's a downstream, right? When you talk about upstream, you're talking about, exploratory activities of the oil and gas industry. That is where you have the drilling, right? Where companies explore, to search for, hydrocarbons, drill, right? And produce those hydrocarbons. So basically, you could refer to it as the E&P, industry, right? Either upstream or E&P, which is exploration and production, right? You now have the midstream. After you've drilled, you've explored, you've produced, you have the midstream. The midstream is basically just deals with, you're talking about the transportation, right? You're talking about the processing, right? The refining aspect of, oil and gas. Right. So you're talking about transportation, you're talking about pipeline right? And the different other modes of transportation, that you have within the oil and gas industry, right? That will cover the midstream, right? And you have the downstream. The downstream, of course, I would say the downstream is closer to the end user, more than the other streams I've mentioned, because you're talking about distribution now, to the final consumer, right? And that is where you have players like the, filling stations, the gas stations, right? And the other relevant, distributors or suppliers, right? You're talking about the downstream in that instance now. So basically, or broadly speaking, you would, categorize the oil and gas value chain into these three big aspects I've mentioned, right? Upstream, midstream, and downstream.
Yeah, thank you very much, Collins, for explaining all the streams that we have. But you also agree that in all of these streams, there are opportunities in each of them. So where do you see the biggest untapped opportunities in Africa's oil and gas ecosystem?
There are quite a couple of it, right? I would say, but from my experience so far, of course, I would still categorize my experience as a young experience, right? I wouldn't say I've, been working in the oil and gas space for quite a while, right? So I would say you have our gas. I'll talk about gas in this instance now, right? I feel like our gas resources is far underutilized, right? As I speak to you now, it's there, verifiable that Nigeria currently uses less than 50% of its gas reserve, right? And that's mostly because the focus has always been on crude, right? A lot of time you hear oil and gas, the whole focus, right from when Nigeria started, its first oil, crude oil production, the focus has always been on crude, right? So gas is an aspect of the oil and gas, resources that is quite untapped, right? And in this era of clean energy, where the focus is always on clean energy, how to, transition from, carbon to cleaner energy, gas is like the untapped, opportunity that you have that people the industry hasn't really, maximized.
How do we tap the opportunities that are in gas? Because you just explained it now. So what do we need to do to ensure that we take a maximum opportunity from that gas sector?
Okay, of course, like I've mentioned, right? Basically, we want to fully see how, as a country or even as a continent, we can utilize our gas reserves, right? And when you talk about that, you're talking about how to attract the right investments, right? So it comes from a standpoint of even maybe realization. Are we ready as a continent, as a country, to fully understand that gone are the days where the main focus is crude oil, right? Are we able to recognize and accept the fact that, there are better opportunities or even more viable opportunities, which are untapped, in our gas, rich gas resources, right? So it comes with that realization and understanding, after which, what investment are we willing to, bring into the gas market or industry, right? We want to bring in gas-focused investments, right? We want to talk about infrastructure. This has always been a perennial issue, right? This gas infrastructure deficit is always an issue, right? In the energy industry, right? Typically, when you want to focus more on, say, investments, like we have the investment within the gas industry, we want to ensure that the relevant infrastructures are in place. And all of that, cost a whole lot. It costs a fortune, right? The oil and gas industry, like I said, is capital intensive. I don't know if I've mentioned it. It's a capital intensive industry, right? And you want to ensure that whatever investments you are putting into that industry, right, they are viable, right? And they can give you the return, right? As an investor, from an investor perspective, right? So I believe one of the best, ways or starting point for Nigeria and the continent, African continent, to tap into, their full, gas investment potentials or gas as a resources is, identifying relevant infrastructure deficits that we currently have and making them more like customized or gas focused, because a lot of the infrastructures we have, a lot of them are, like I said, typically focus on the traditional resources like, crude oil, like I mentioned, right? So if we want to probably need to start thinking about how to, come up with gas-focused, infrastructures, right? Start from there, right? And even begin to even utilize those infrastructures to maximize our gas resources. Like I said, the gas resources or reserve in Nigeria, half of it is untapped, right? Half of it has not been maximized, right? So it starts by establishing the relevant infrastructure, from there, we can take it off from there.
Okay, so don't you think that one of the reasons why the infrastructures are not in place is because of the huge capital intensiveness? What makes oil and gas projects bankable? If it is that really much, if it is that expensive, what makes it bankable?
Okay, to be very honest, bankability is a serious issue in the oil and gas industry. Now when you talk about bankability, you want to address three major factors, right? You want to talk about risks. If you want to invite somebody or an investor to invest, part of the three key factors the investors will be looking at. You're talking about the risks. How risky is that investment, right? Or how sufficiently can that investor manage the risks in that investment, right? So you want to look at that. You also want to look at what is the financial viability of that project. How financially viable, is that project? You also want to look at the cash flow eventually, right? If I invest in this particular, project, this particular business or area, what's my possible cash flow, right? And like I mentioned, given how very unique the oil and gas industry is, right? It's very difficult as an investor, right, to fully ascertain these three factors. Positively, before investing, and a couple of factors will contribute to that. The oil and gas industry, for example, is mostly based on research and analysis. And I'm talking about when you talk about the geophysical, the geological part of it, right? Where studies are done to ascertain reserves, and a lot of times when all of these are done, when you get into proper, operations, exploration, you get into sometimes wells that have been adjudged to have reserves or good, oil and gas reserves. When you get into proper operations, you get to discover that these wells are dry, for instance. And that is why I'm talking, I'm making that point to speak to how difficult it may be to ascertain some of these, factors, these risk factors that I've mentioned, right? Now, if you want to make an oil and gas project bankable, what you want to do, you want to convince the investor of how financially viable that project will be if they put their resources in it, right? And the investor just wants to look at what exactly is the cash flow. I should be able to ascertain them that if I put XX amount, I'm able to get, XX amount, subject to certain variables, right? So if at the end of the day, investor makes all of that investment and when it's time to get all of those return on investment, you're able to do all of that as just of certain factors. One of which, I'm sure you must have heard of vandalism, right? You have pipeline vandalism, right? It's a major issue. You heard of oil bunkering activities. Those are some of the issues. For vandalism, I will tell you, key players like Shell, must have heard of Shell. There were times where they came out to fully reveal that one of the reasons they were divesting or selling off most of their onshore assets were because of, issues like vandalism. The crude they put into the pipeline in a bid to transport, right, at the terminal where that product needs to come out. Whatever comes out there is not a reflection of what has gone in. And that is because of the fact that there are times there've been some diversions along, the way people who are involved in oil thefts have tapped into this pipeline or network, and are stealing this crude. You understand? These are these are products of big investments that have been done, capital intensive investments, right? And these investors are unable to fully get, value for what the investments they've made, right? So these are some of the issues that affect bankability. When tomorrow an oil and gas operator wants to invite, investors, right, say to partner, provide financial assistance or support. These are some of the issues they look at, right? What is even the security of that investment, right? What are the chances that this investment will be financially profitable to me, right? And how are we able to manage? How is you are as the operator and as the country like Nigeria now, how are you able to make the investment climate even conducive, right, for an investor coming in? So those are, I've just spoken about them generally, but yeah, those are like bankable issues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Collins. And you talked about the issues, or in fact, we've seen it everywhere. It's in the news everywhere, the issues of pipeline vandalism, and it is affecting the oil and gas sector. So how do we actually curb this issue? What is the lasting solution to curbing the issue of pipeline vandalism? Because it is still on and on and on, even until this day.
Okay, honestly, it's a problem that has been perennial, and up to today, finding solution has been a bit difficult for a lot of reasons, right? I think first of all, it starts with proper sensitization, right? The people of Nigeria, citizens of Nigeria, need to understand that we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot, right? And I mean, some of these groups may see it as an easy way for them to make money. Some may see it as their way of, getting their share from the national cake, right? Of course, we know that once these oil and gas resources are maximized or produced, once a better way to put it, you want to start some of these groups within communities have this feeling of being left out, right? That they don't get to benefit fully, even as originators, right? I'm talking about states now, from the perspective of being indigenous of such states or environments where those crude oil activities are carried out, right? So they see that their way of, self-help, right? Getting my own share of the national cake by myself, right? Not depending on waiting for the government. By the end of the day, they need to fully understand that that has a negative implication on Nigeria as a country, and it will trickle down to the ordinary citizen, right? Because you are discouraging investors, right? If we continue to commit all of this vandalism, crude oil theft, investors are discouraged. They don't look at Nigeria as a place to come and invest. And if you don't have these investors coming to Nigeria to invest, the government has limited resources to develop these crude oil, resources. You need that foreign, support, and they need to be confident enough that their investment is secured, right? So it starts with sensitization down to the grassroots. Citizens even at the grassroots need to understand that we're losing a lot for just that temporal gain. If it's a temporal gain, whatever they want to call it, it's costing the country a whole lot more than that, right? They need to properly understand that. Then the government also needs to put proper policies in place, to deal with some of these issues. The other day I was scrolling online and I saw an article which was speaking to the fact that some of these crude oil theft and vandalism and oil bunkering activities are sponsored by, members of the government. So we cannot be carrying out self-sabotaging activities and expect, everything to go well and expect or make the investors believe we are fighting it, right? We need to tackle these issues directly and be serious. When we say we're tackling them, we need to be serious about tackling them. Few issues are that proper policies in place, right? The governments need to ensure that when they mean business, when they mean to tackle things like this, they are actually tackling things like this. And it's not just mere words out there, without action to back them up, right? And like I said, the citizens need to also fully understand the implications of some of these things, because a lot of it is coming from a place of ignorance.
Okay, we will talk about the structures and the international investors you talked about earlier. But before then, let's go back to where the citizens are. So one of the reasons when investigations or questions are asked, they tell you that the government or the companies don't take care of the citizens where these pipelines and are situated, or where these companies are situated. So as a result of that, they tend to react. It's a kind of reaction. Okay, so what do we need to do? Then we've seen them in time past. We've seen the outcome of the citizens or the indigenes of a particular community trying to protect themselves. Now, to the companies and to governments that are, do you think they are doing enough in paying attention to the needs of the people in that community, or there is a big gap that they really need to fill up to ensure that the citizens' welfare are put into proper consideration?
Okay, that is quite an interesting question, and I'll respond to it. Now, the government is trying. That's all I would say. I mean, it's good to start on that note. The government is trying. Now, historically, right, the PIA has currently enacted a provision, right, specifically dedicated to host communities. And host communities, of course, are environmental areas or localities where all of these oil and gas productions, these are communities adjoining areas where oil and gas production activities are carried out, right? Now, prior to the PIA, what was existing? There was a regime which was existing there, and would call it the Global Memorandum of Understanding regime. It was basically a framework under which oil and gas operators, would enter into some sort of arrangements, right, with host communities where they are based or where they carry out these oil and gas operations. And those arrangements were just to get the host community to identify certain needs, right, that they have within those communities, or certain projects, right? And these oil and gas operators now, under the arrangement, will come to some sort of understanding where they would, develop certain key projects. Some even sponsor indigenous from that host communities on scholarship, educational scholarship. Some build hospitals, some establish pipe-borne water, just projects generally within that community, as a way of paying back, or as a way, it might not be, it cannot be enough, right? But just as a way of giving back, right, to this host community, to these communities. Now, it used to be an arrangement that was not enacted. So it was just based on the discretion of the oil and gas operator and the host community. But now, what the PIA has done is it has enacted it and made it a law. Now, under the PIA, there's a law, there's a provision specially dedicated to host communities. And that provision is seeking to mandate or ensure that oil and gas operators actually dedicate some aspects of their revenue, right, into development of host communities. I think the percentage is 3%. If I'm not mistaken, I'll have to confirm that to check. 3% of the preceding annual expenditure of the operator, right, is supposed to be dedicated. Either 3 or 5%, but I will need to confirm that, right? It's supposed to be dedicated in, especially for host communities, right? There's already, the PIA even goes further to establish a framework under which this amount should be managed, right? There's a framework under which is managed, and it should be, it just to make so it doesn't look like these operators are releasing these funds and also, calling the shot on how these funds should be used. The PIA also established a regime under which these funds will be managed by selected members of the host communities under what we call a host community trust system or regime, right? Exactly. So there is that. And this sum that is to be set aside is supposed to be dedicated to taking care of certain projects within the host communities, right? And that is what the PIA has done. And I also understand that apart from this, some operators also go ahead to, outside this other arrangement that is already statutory, carry out certain other host community beneficial projects, right? Or other arrangements with these host communities. All of this is to ensure that these host communities don't feel left out, right? That actually they are benefiting from these oil and gas operations, either ways, right? They might not be getting the crude coming to it, but they should also be benefiting from the resources, generated revenue generated from those activities. That is what the law has done, right? Now, certain quarters would want to argue, to ask if that is enough to cater for these host communities. That conversation can be had. It's a conversation for another day. But the most important thing is that the law already recognizes that these host communities should be taken care of, and steps are being taken. Yes, I'm aware that a lot of these operators have signed up to this and have, kicked this system running already. I'm very aware a whole lot of them have. keep the system running. They've started remitting, this fraction of their, resources, dedicated for host communities. All we just need is our host communities to be patient, allow these oil and gas operators continue their work, not disrupt, not vandalize, their resources or infrastructures, and not, steal from all of these, quarters I've mentioned, the oil and gas, crude that are produced. We just need patience from these host communities, and we need cooperation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Collins. I hope that the host communities, they listen, and I hope the companies also fulfill their own parts of the bargain, whatever they've signed. So let's talk about structure. So from your experience, what separates a well-structured project from one that's struggling, the one that struggles?
Okay. You want to talk about structure now?
Yeah.
So it's still tied to, like I said, because of how capital intensive an oil and gas project generally is, right? It's difficult for you to see instances where an oil and gas project is embarked on by just a single entity, right? Because of how capital intensive it is, a lot of times it is done in partnership, right? You want to partner with other investors like yourself, pool resources together, and embark on these oil and gas operations. And when the dividends from them come, there's a structure on how to distribute all of this, right? Now, if I'm talking about structure, I'll be talking about it in that light, right? So as an oil and gas operator who has the license or lease, you want to be able to properly identify investors who have the same goal as you, right?
Yeah.
You want to identify them, yes. You want to strike a proper, not like, I won't call it proper, but a mutually beneficial deal with these partners, right? It may be a joint venture arrangement. It might be a production sharing arrangement, whatever the arrangement is. But we want to strike what is a mutually beneficial deal. And of course, this will be documented. If we're talking about structure, you can't take away documentation, right? Okay. You want to properly document this from production. How should financing of this project happen, right? How should the risks be shared? How should the profits, how should the costs, be distributed, and recovered at the same time? How should, production, profit and all, right, be shared? How should the management of the physical aspect of it be handled, right? I'm talking about government entitlement in this instance now, right? So these are all of what you can, properly structure through a proper documentation. And that is where lawyers come to play, right? You want to ensure that you're hiring the best set of lawyers who have experience, in advising on deals like this, and they want to help you, handhold you, or guide you through this process and ensure that you have a well-structured documentation in place, and also see to it that, in fact, if for want to, but in a nutshell, the best way to get a well-structured, arrangement is ensuring it is properly structured via documentation.
Documentation.
Yeah, by the best set of lawyers who can advise you in that. They will help you structure all of this and ensure that all of these, the factors I've mentioned, are properly catered for: distribution of risks, distribution of costs, distribution of profits, the revenue, fiscal obligations, all of that are properly catered for, right?
You talked about documentation as regarding the legal work. So the question now is, what role do strong legal frameworks actually play in protecting national interest while attracting foreign investment? Now, you know what you were talking about is just the work that has to do with us here as those that own the oil and gas. Now we're talking about the national interest, international interest, and everything. So what legal framework do we need to put in place to attract international investments?
Okay, thank you. Again, it's a very crucial question. So maybe I would approach that question by first talking about it from the perspective of an investor, right? Of course, I'm not an investor yet, but I'm looking through the lens of an investor. Okay. What every investor wants to know is, if I invest in this, what are the chances? I mean, what is in this investment for me generally, right? How do I get, my return on investments, right? How risky is this project? And how am I able to get, opportunity to fully maximize, my position as an investor in that project. And one of the most important things is, am I able to get access to my return on investment? We're talking about, the profits now for the investor, the return on investment. Of course, I've mentioned that. Am I able to, of course, a lot of these foreign investors are not Nigerians, right? They want to be able to assess, their dividend from this investment and be able to export them, if that's the word to use now. I mean, to transfer those, all of some of those return on investment out of Nigeria, right? So I've just basically, captured, the mindset or the thinking process of an investor, right? Now, if an investor is coming into a country to invest, the investor wants to tick some of these boxes, right? No investor wants to come and invest, and when it's time for the investor to reap his dividend, you have maybe legal obstacles saying that they can't transfer their return on investment or their dividends from those investments, right? And which is where legal policies need to, that is where legal policies are delicate, right? I'm talking about from a national point of view, right? You want to ensure that you're not discouraging investors. You're not putting fear in investors, right? One major concern is investors have with investing in, a sovereign in industries or sectors that have presence of the government, like the oil and gas industry, for instance, is an industry that, of course, has the presence of the government almost, at every point, right? They're always scared of expropriation. Expropriation generally is just speaking to the ability of the government to maybe take over an asset, right? Or take over an investment or step into, say an investment in a bid to maybe take over, exercise the sovereign rights, right? So those are some of the fears of investors have, right? And we want, as a country, want to give these investors confidence. We want to let them know that Nigeria is a safe place to invest. You can come, you have that security of your investment, you can invest, and when your investment, of course, begin to yield this dividend, you can always transfer your dividends. You can do with them whatever you want to do with them. Of course, subject to you fulfilling your fiscal obligation. I'm talking about the taxes now, right? Of course, that's the entitlement to government, right? So you want to assure investors, you want to give them that confidence. Now, to give you a practical example, there's a section under the PIA, right? That should be section 84, if I'm not mistaken, which speaks to some sort of possible concession arrangements that the government may want to have with, say, maybe an investor, for instance, right? Now, it's looking at a situation where the government, through NNPC, may want to enter into some sort of arrangement, oil and gas production, of course, arrangement with a third party or an investor, right? Maybe it can be through the incorporation of a joint venture or through an unincorporated joint venture. Basically, in layman terms, just partnership. Now, but that section goes further to make provision for something which I believe a lot of investors who look at will be scared. And that is giving the government right through an NPC there to have a participatory interest or carried interest of up to 60% of that particular transaction or that particular project, for instance, now, or that particular oil and gas project, right? 60%. So saying that at any point in time, the government through an NPC can decide to participate in that particular project or transaction up to 60%, right? Leaving just 40% now, say, for other partners that want to, but saying that that's for you. If you put that kind of provision and say 60%, you're basically saying the government would have a controlling participatory interest if it wants to, discretionary. What that means is that an investor who is looking at that kind of provision will be looking at it from a commercial point of view. I would make all of these investments, right? I will do all of this, and tomorrow you say that the government can decide just because they have the concession over that particular asset. They can decide to, take up to 60%. Those kind of provisions put fear in investors, right? So even if as a government you want to have such provision, you want to try and, I don't know, through some other means, give investors assurance. You want to cushion rather, whatever effect that would have, on investors. If you're taking that, you could have to be giving back to the investors through some other means, right? So those are sort of the things. So, policy shifts generally. You want to ensure that whatever policies, like I just gave you an instance, that provision in the PIA you're making, you have investors at the back of your mind. You don't want to be scaring them, because whether I like it or not, as a country, we need these investors. Nigeria does not have the relevant or sufficient or abundance of resources to take care of, make these investments themselves. They need their partnership, that foreign exchange. Right. Okay. And those investors are human. If they want to come, they want to be, guaranteed, that they can participate or, take up this investment without some of those restrictions or legal loopholes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Collins. As we're rounding off, I quickly want to ask, as the world talks about energy transition, that's the talk here and there now, where does Africa fit in?
It's a very important topic, energy transition, and Africa needs to. I feel Africa is still taking the backseat in that conversation, right? When you talk about energy transition, you're generally just speaking to the transition from the traditional mode of energy, to the clean energy, of course, from hydrocarbon to cleaner energy. And of course, there are good basis or rationale for this. We are talking about maintaining a safer environment, sustainable environment, and that is why all of that topic, is up, right? And Africa needs to actually take the front seat, in that conversation, right? We need to ensure that we are catching up with, a lot of these foreign countries who are far ahead. When I mean very far ahead, they are very far ahead. In fact, Europe, for instance, I'm aware that policies have already been put in place to even commercialize, this transition to cleaner energy, right? They've put framework in place to commercialize it. And in Africa, we are just still trying to see how we can adapt it as part of our operations. Europe, countries like, Europe, other countries have since moved from just making an operational, bit or part of what they do to a way of living, right? So Nigeria needs to take, not just Nigeria, I'm talking about Africa now, they need to take the front burner, right? We want to institutionalize, this transition move. We want to, enact them into law. We want to ensure they're operational, right? We want to imbibe them in our, operations generally. Beyond that, we want to ensure we are making proper progress, right? Okay. And that is why Africa needs to take the front burner. And one of the available resources for Africa is gas. When I talk about gas, has been proven to be a cleaner source of energy compared to the crude oil, right? So, and this, of course, gas assistance. Gas is it powers plants, powers a lot of energy, devices, that we have, right? So we need to know what Africa needs to do is come up with a proper framework on how to utilize gas as a transition fuel, right? That way we begin to live sustainably and we begin to live cleaner, right? And of course, I expect that countries in Africa would, take this as a matter of national interest, right? Or policy. exactly, which is what Europe is doing. What Europe has done is, as a region, Europe has tried to, ensure that there's a system in place to, uniformly deal with this issue. And Africa needs to also look at imbibing that. It's not just something that Nigeria should be doing and Kenya or South Africa is doing something else, right? Yeah. We need to have this uniform approach, to this transition.
Yeah, thank you so much, Collins Okamadiri, for coming on the show today. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah, but
before I let you go, the name Okamadiri, what does it mean and where is it from?
Okay, I'm Igbo, right? And I'm from Imo State.
Okay.
Okamadiri, for those who understand Igbo, of course, it's my surname, right? I've asked questions, and the explanations I've gotten as to its meaning is, it's like a rhetorical question, right? If you want to put it in a sentence, Igbo sentence, it would just be Okamadiri. Oh. It's like a rhetorical question asking, is he better than me? Are you better than me? Oh. Right? Exactly. It's a rhetorical question, right? And I wouldn't know what the rationale is for why that is my surname, right? But of course, that's the explanation I've gotten from, of course, my parents as to what that name means.
All right. Thank you very much, Okamadiri. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right.